All right, welcome back, everyone. This is the end of the world with Michael and Stu,
I'm Michael.
and I'm Stu. And today we are talking about the cultural phenomenon that is The Last of Us, HBO prestige television series. Um, but before we get into that, I just wanted to do a little bit of I'll give you guys a little bit more information about who exactly it is that we are. I'm Stu. I'm a teacher. I teach at the university level, and I'm a writer. One of my main areas of academic interest is the environment and the way that climate change and other environmental disasters relate to the way authors sort of discuss these topics in their books. And I've been teaching a class that's about the environment and literature for the last 3 years, which is part of what qualifies me to be the host of this show. And Michael, what about you?
There's not much that qualifies me, but I like to describe myself as reasonably paranoid about the what did I say last time? The impending apocalypse.
The nearing end of the world. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that well, I'm a stand-up comic and also a writer, but I am certainly not an expert. Just generally, I am very concerned um, about what's going on and not really doing anything about it, if I'm being honest. Which also kind of, well, that's a whole nother topic. But
Yeah, we'll
you
talk
know,
about that more. I mean, I
sure,
think one of the things I come back to in my course a lot is that there are a lot of social pressures to sort of take individual responsibility for the climate crisis. Like,
right.
do your part, and a lot of that is pretty bogus. When you look at the climate crisis, for instance, from a macro perspective, it's got
Why do you think that's bogus?
because if you lived a perfectly climate neutral existence for your entire life, you never polluted, you never littered, you never used any excess water, it would make absolutely no difference in the problems of the world, right? The only way that the climate crisis is going to be resolved is by action by large corporations and governments, right?
Sure.
Like
Well,
we as individuals have very little impact on that. And there's an anecdote I always tell in my classes about this, which is that I remember I was in college and a friend of mine was a big environmentalist. This is early 2000s, so he was very cutting edge. This wasn't like a cool thing to be. It was sort of it was a form of like activism. And I
right.
remember I remember one time I was at the dining hall, and I got up to get a second cup of coffee, and I returned to the table with a new mug. And he was like, Stu, couldn't have reused your mug? What, you just like want the earth to die? And I tell this anecdote because in that moment I like just wanted to do nothing more than like run out into the street and find a trash can and just like pour it into a river. because like by putting the responsibility for the environment solely on my like one utterly inconsequential
Uh-huh.
minor in this very moralizing and judgmental way, it caused me to become so angry that I like actually want to do the opposite of what my friend was.
Sure, right.
So I don't know. I'm a little wary of these like calls for us to individually like own climate change when it's
Well, I
it's
think, I
a
mean,
problem that's
I
bigger
would
than
say that
us.
that's such a huge problem in any realm of our current political framework, right? It's like, to me, where I come down on that is more, I think the line between, you know, pointing out the rather obvious idea that individuals can't change things in any real macro sense
Yeah.
also does eat away at the sense of collective organization. I think people's will to do that and see what might be able to happen. I think there's real.
No, I mean obviously you're right. I mean, I think it is good to do your part. But I think when you start shifting into like morally blaming people in the manner that I
Sure.
just described, that can
Yeah.
have a like reverse.
Yeah. And I
People
and
tend
I
tend to not respond well to being like hectored.
right, and I do sort of think that there's this kind of sleight of hand that's not to be too
Well, no, I mean, I think
conspiratorial, but
that's it.
these
No,
large
one hundred
corporations,
percent.
these
No,
governments, they reduce it to the individual level
exactly.
precisely to avoid any type of popular
Accountability on
will,
their
any type
part.
of accountability. Yeah.
That is exactly right. And that's why I'm skeptical of these like government or corporate like backed, like everyone pitch in, you all do your part sort of endeavors, because clearly it's an attempt to exculpate or exonerate themselves from the actual guilt that is like 90
Classic,
is like 95% on their
yeah,
shoulders.
classic Fedra behavior.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that does kind of bring us into one of the dynamics that we see in this show. So, what before we get like into the talking about individual episodes or characters or anything like that, like what's your experience with zombies in general? Because this is essentially a zombie show, right?
Well, yes, I would say that my experience with all of like that entire genre of sort of like horror uh, apocalypse, I have completely ignored my entire life, no
Okay.
interest in at all.
So you're not like a
Uh,
horror fan or
just like forever couldn't do any type of zombie movie without just instantly discarding it.
tuning out.
It's very similar that my relationship to The Last of Us is actually very similar to my relationship with Game of Thrones, which
Okay.
is I could never watch fantasy in a million
Uh-huh.
years, would never read it, do Dungeons and Dragons, all this shit. And when it came out, everyone's telling me how, oh, you got to watch Game of Thrones, and I'm like, man, it's fucking dragons and shit. I'm not going anywhere near that. And then
Uh-huh.
eventually, a few seasons in, I'm like, okay, there's so many people saying that. Then I
So
watched
you
it.
cave to mass pressure. You
I
felt the
really, I really am, I think, the perfect target demographic for like this move,
towards
from
to prestige.
fantasy and zombie movie type, yes, into the prestige world. And my last stand probably was Walking Dead. I did not watch a second of Walking Dead,
Yeah,
even though
yeah.
even though it kind of is an important precursor to
Forerunner.
this.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I think it's funny you say that about Game of Thrones. Like I had a friend who was a rabid fan of the books. And I, unlike you, have always liked horror movies, have always liked fantasy, read literally hundreds of fantasy novels as a kid. Uh could not tell you a single thing about any of the plots, but part of growing older, I guess. But I had a friend who was he was like, Stu, you're gonna love this. And there was something again about his like rabid enthusiasm that for the first year of Game of Thrones, I was like, not for me. No thanks.
here, yeah,
Again,
you're peer pressured. You're peer pressured out of enjoying the
yeah,
show,
exactly.
right?
Which is a funny kind of phenomenon. And then eventually I too caved and watched it. I didn't similarly to you, I did not watch Walking Dead when it initially came out. I did eventually during the pandemic watch, I think, the first 5 or 6 seasons of it, just because,
Sure.
oh, there's a lot of episodes of this. And I even read the comic on which it's based, which is from early 2000s, by a guy, written by a guy called Robert Kirkman, who's like a very influential sort of indie comics guy, now one of the owners of Image Comics. And the show is pretty faithful to the comic. I think it's a decent show, especially the first season, which was directed by Frank Darabont, who's like a good, legit, has a reputation director of horror and other things. And then he had some kind of disagreement with AMC or the network, and he left. And
Sure.
after that, I think the show kind of descends into a more typical monster of the week, zombie of the week, as the case may be.
Right. Well, I think that's like we spoke in the first episode about the movement of these apocalyptic genres into prestige television, high production movies, sort of like Oscar bait, even
uh,
potentially. And
yeah, yeah,
I think that's the shift. It's like, Walking Dead did break into
mainstream
that
popularity.
realm, but it's still, it's AMC, and Last of Us is kind of the real apex. It's like it got the big thing. It got all the money to do
Got
it on
to
HBO,
HBO. Yeah,
and sort of speaks to what we've been talking about earlier, which is just that, this type of movie, this type of content, uh, has now just reached the highest levels of
the
American
apogee.
American televisual and cinematic culture, right?
That's right. And I think the timing of the show coming out as it did in January 23, obviously, given that it's 3 years after COVID, roughly, there's a it sort of is able to feed off of a lot of the worst impulses of the sort of response to the COVID pandemic. In as much as, this is a show that's based on a pandemic, obviously. In this case, it's a fungal pandemic. Cordyceps, right, is this type of real life fungus that infects insects in such a way that it kind of takes over their nervous systems. And you see these little worms and snails and beetles and things that have this like mushroom kind of tail growing out of their heads, and they're moving around, but the insect is effectively dead, but the fungus is in charge. And this sort of transplants that idea. What if humans became vulnerable to this kind of infection? And obviously, we had a pandemic, we had lockdowns, nothing nearly as serious as what we see in the show, thank goodness. But
Well, unless you believe what Aaron Rodgers is saying, or
no,
whoever
yeah.
the 5G has gotten inside of us,
Yeah, no, I mean, exactly. Like, I think that's sort of what the show, in some ways, is feeding off those impulses, right? It's showing like a real lockdown, right? There is a
Yeah.
real fascist government that has taken over in the aftermath of this. And it's been going for 20 years, right? And people are living in these quarantine zones where there are these military police, there's very limited resources. We'll get into this a little bit more in a second, but the one other thing I wanted to discuss was the video game. You unlike
Yeah.
me have some experience of actually playing the video game, right?
I am a truly horrible video game player. Uh, Attention span, all of that. I just have never. It's sort of similar to waiting on Game of
Fantasy or
Thrones and
yeah.
The Walking Dead. I really just played FIFA, couldn't do
Uh-huh.
anything else.
Yeah.
And my brother got into video games like this, and my friends got into video games like this, and I was like, this is so stupid. And I did play it before the show came out
Okay.
and made it, what would take a normal video game player maybe an hour and a half into the game. Like the
And
first
it
time I had to like try to get through a group of zombies, I just quit the game. And but then once I saw the show, I was like, oh, I should
should go
get through
back.
the story. I'm now attached to the story, so I'll go back. And I did make it not far. I mean, I can't. I got probably to episode 3 of the TV show, where you
Okay.
meet the Nick Offerman
Yeah, yeah.
prepper guy.
Okay,
And
yeah.
I just am bad. I'm just really bad. But, it is interesting that both it is, like you said, the timing of the show with COVID, but this was obviously all in the video game.
Right. The video game
And
came out, I think, 10 years before the show. I think it's 2013
yeah,
was the
yeah.
the
And is
first
considered one
version.
of, I
The
think,
best.
considered one of the best video game stories of all
Oh
time,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Like
yeah.
people are obsessed with it. But, as I started going back through the game, you start to see what is this still weird part of this culture, I think, of fan service and faithfulness,
Oh,
right? Which is
in the show, you mean?
it's yeah, people like going online and talking about like, what gets ignored, what's get included, excluded. Game of Thrones did this a ton,
With the
obviously, but
books, right?
yeah, and like a lot of credit is being given, if I remember correctly, to The Last of Us for like, wow, this shot is exactly like the shot in the video game.
Uh-huh.
Like there's sequences that are really the exact same. Like it's so funny to
It's
me.
like, wow, they copied it so
Wow, yeah,
faithfully.
you cribbed the actual game. Of course, like the creator of the game is obviously involved with the show, so it makes
Sure.
sense. But I think it's one of the things that keeps you interested in the plot and keeps you kind of on the edge of your feet, but also one of the failings ultimately of the show is when you rewatch it after playing the video game.
Uh-huh.
What I found is a little too faithful. It feels like a video game too often to me. Even the dialogue will be like truncated and it'll be like, Joel, move. Right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
it'll
yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
it'll sound exactly like
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 an
that. Like,
like an NPC is like chiming in or something.
yes. And to me, I think that sort of came through more after I'd played the video game. But I think it's important to note that video games in general of this variety were huge in helping lift this genre.
Yeah.
We like to talk about it's because people are concerned about the end of the world and all of
Right.
this stuff. But ultimately, you also have the market forces of video game fans and the idea of apocalypse video games, Fallout. There's a ton.
Yeah.
Uh,
It's a big
Also has
genre.
helped drive this phenomenon into the realms of television and movie that we're now talking about.
Yeah, and I think, especially in the sort of wake of the Marvel movie adaptations are sort of running that well is running dry, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
They've adapted a lot of the big stories. A lot of the original star actors have been priced out and have moved on to other projects. And so the industry as a whole is kind of feeling around for like where's the next IP
Right. What
source that we
universe can
can.
we extend?
Yeah, exactly. Well said. And I think video games are a logical
Yep.
because video games I think I heard this on the American Prestige podcast recently. They are an even bigger market than film. Like
Oh yeah.
more money is spent per annum on the video game like industry than in Hollywood, which is kind of shocking, right? I mean, just in terms of talking about
It's one of those
prestige,
things that's shocking until
you
like
think
you
about
hear
it and
it and
you're
then
like, oh
it
yeah,
makes yeah, total
it
sense
totally
now.
makes sense. But video games are still a relatively new phenomenon, right? I mean,
Right.
Nintendo Entertainment System, the first massively successful, that's the mid
Well, that's the last
80s.
thing I would say about the TV or the video game, having gone through and played a chunk of it,
Yeah.
is that the critique I just gave about how the dialogue or the shots translate directly to some of the TV show. In fairness, I also hadn't played like a role-playing video
Like
game
a
story
video game
in years.
since the 90s or whatever.
And like it's really well written. It's you really do care about these people.
Oh yeah,
And
yeah.
I hadn't really experienced that in the video game world because I'm just playing like, FIFA or Madden or something.
Sure.
But like, wow, like my brother was telling me he's finished the game and he was telling me like how affected he was by the actual video. He's playing it and like he's moved
Uh-huh.
genuinely by the character that he's being, you know, and I wish I could experience that. It could, it'd be interesting to relate to that on the podcast. But I think that really does happen because the writing and the production value is so good in these things now.
Oh yeah.
Uh, that in many ways the stories are developed way better than a half an hour or hour television show or a 90-minute or 2 hour movie.
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense, and we're just old, so we,
Yes.
we it's not your Super Mario Brother plot anymore, where
Yeah.
oh, I'm sorry, the princess is in the next castle. It's
Right.
like the extent of
There's
the sort of plot development in the,
controllers have more than two buttons. I just like
yeah,
that. They lost me there.
yeah, it's like I'm out. All right, so let's get into the show itself. I think
Sure.
what's interesting about this show is that it sort of uses the apocalypse or the apocalyptic scenario that's playing out in this world as a kind of backdrop uh, over which to explore multiple different genres of story, right?
Mhm.
And or it also with each episode kind of explores a different response that a community or a group of characters is having to the kind of apocalyptic scenario that is playing out. So the first episode is great fake out, right? We meet Joel's daughter, who we think is going to be the protagonist of the show. She's like this intelligent young woman. She's trying to get this watch fixed for her dad. There's like this little
Right.
plot.
Her dad's not the particularly responsible. He's not a deadbeat, but he needs his daughter to help him with the cooking and the cleaning and that type
Yeah,
of
and we
thing.
don't see the mother in the picture. We meet Joel's brother. And it's, I think, 2003 that the show starts off, right? And
Yep.
then uh, we're basically witnessing the day of the outbreak of the cordyceps infection. And the first signs that something's wrong are, yeah, there's that old lady who's in a wheelchair, right? She's
Mhm.
kind of twitching, and right? We get these like sort of little hints that like uh something
And the
is
watch
off.
guy's wife comes out And
And
it's
she's
like,
like, we
go
have to
home.
go. Yeah. We're
Yeah.
closing. And he's like, well, let me
No,
give her the look.
she doesn't give any information to this child.
Yeah, yeah. She's just like, get
She's
out
just
of
like,
here.
you
We're
know what you should
closed.
do? Go home. You'll figure it out later. Go home.
And then very quickly we start to see signs of something seriously wrong, right?
Yeah.
There are military jets flying over. Uh, Basically, chaos erupts almost immediately. The daughter goes into the other neighbor's house where we've seen her. She has a positive relationship with these people in an
Yeah.
early scene, and there's one of them is just feasting on the neck of another one, right? And there are spores like growing out of the mouth, and it's immediately clear like the zombie apocalypse, as it's commonly referred to.
Right. By the time Joel returns home to, get back to the daughter, it's all systems go, like get in the car. Like
Yeah, yeah. And they attempt
the
to
worst is
flee. And
happening.
this is the scene where the video game adaptation for me came through really strongly when they're like driving through
Oh
the
yeah.
town. And
Yeah.
I haven't played the game, but I could just tell like
The
something
pilot by far feels the most
indebted
like
to
the
the
video
game.
game, and I think
Yeah.
it's just amazing for a pilot. It really brings you. It's like the shots of them driving forward, then driving backward, like
And then a plane
all of that.
crashes into the
Yeah,
town and
yeah.
it's just like, okay, wow, this is I mean it's what but like when you watch this like when you start seeing planes like falling out of the sky, like there's no coming back from this, right? Like this is
Right,
just
right,
like
right.
it isn't like just my initial thought was like, okay, like everyone is dead.
Yes.
Like
Right.
this is not
And I think that is like one of the problems, like, to explore in the show is like, you know, would this many people be okay 20 years later? I
I
don't
mean,
buy that.
we don't have a strong sense of what the Earth's population that's uninfected is, do we?
We don't, but we do have like a level of infrastructure that I'm even very dubious
That you're
about the
skeptical
chances.
with.
Just because when I saw the pilot, it's all happening so in a matter of minutes, it's getting
Yeah,
so bad that
yeah.
like if I extrapolate out to like a fortnight, I'm thinking I'm thinking there's like, and they do an okay job about, dealing with some of the supply chain problems that would come up and they can't
Yeah.
find a ton of stuff and it's more trading
So
and
it's a more
bartering and
realistic
stealing.
depiction than Arrival in that regard.
Absolutely,
The
absolutely.
response.
But I
I
still have a bit of a leap believing in 20 years you'd have QZs and governments at all in this
Yeah.
with this type
That
of
that
illness, you know.
that's sort of what I was feeling as I was watching the initial sequence unfold. Just like, all right, this, and there's like military guys, but like one of the mysteries is, at least initially, what is the mechanism of this infection? I think we learned in a later episode that it got into some wheat plant or something, right?
It was
And
like a
that,
sugar grain
yeah, yeah, yeah.
factory in Indonesia, I believe, where they,
Right.
right?
But
Isn't
that
that where it
this,
starts?
but it also, it seems to have gotten into the food of, and we see the old lady who's the first infected. We see she's eating like a biscuit, and they're like,
Yeah,
Joel, don't you want one of these biscuits? And Joel's like, no, thanks. And
yeah.
I think it's sort of implied that if Joel had just been like, oh yeah, sure, that he would have fallen prey as well.
Right. I mean, that is kind of one of the interesting things I think about the show is that they do leave space for not really knowing for sure what
It doesn't
happened.
over explain. It doesn't
20
make the
years later,
mistake.
all you get is the one episode where Joel is explaining the sort of what he at least portrays to Ellie
What
is
he
the
understands to.
commonly
Yeah.
accepted, but we don't even know if that's true. But like it got into the food supply, we don't even know if that's what actually
Right.
happened.
Another thing that we didn't talk about is that the show opens with this weird cold open where it's in the 60s, right? And it's this TV show and they're
Yeah, I love
talking.
that part.
Like, I don't understand what that's. I
And it's
mean, I
like
guess.
what's the guy like Big Head or whatever from Silicon Valley is
Oh, yeah, yeah,
sort of
yeah.
just cast as the host almost inexplicably. It's like a sort of one of those like kind of goofy hosts of that era
Yeah, yeah,
that
yeah,
were
yeah.
like doing real interviews but were kind of quirky. And
Yeah,
he
yeah,
like
yeah.
plays that to the extreme.
Like
Everything's deadpan.
Mike Douglas or something like that,
Yeah,
or
right, right,
one of
right.
the 60s, 70s hosts. What do you think that's doing in the show? Is it just for background? Like,
Yeah,
it's
I mean,
like
I wonder if
we've known about this
that
for a long time and have done nothing. Is it like a metaphor for climate change? Is it a, you know? Like,
it just feels like, I mean, I think it looks ridiculous, but I could understand that it felt to the writer, to the creator, like
we need to
clean and
ground
tight.
this. We need to give
It's
this
it's quick.
background. Yeah, it's very
Yeah, and
short.
like there's no explanation, and obviously no one in the world reacted to this idea, which I do think I actually like, I mean,
Yeah,
it it was 1968. It just felt like some crackpot, right? It was portrayed as some crackpot
everyone's
being
like, oh
like,
ho ho ha ha.
yeah,
Right, and that's around the time that people began to think about climate change. I think the first studies, or even a little earlier than that, so in a way, it's like big corporations like Mobil, Exxon, or whatever have known that carbon emissions were causing climate change since at least
right.
the early 70s, if not even earlier, and have done nothing about it and have in fact worked diligently to suppress knowledge of this,
Yeah, I mean, to me,
much in the
the
way that
it
tobacco companies do about cancer and things.
sure,
It's
sure,
like,
that's right.
so there's like a long history of like, let's keep this under the wraps as long as we possibly
Yeah, I
can.
mean, for me, the pilot could just as easily have happened without the sequence,
Yeah, I
but
agree.
it was
So
a bit of fun.
eventually the daughter is killed by a military man who
Yeah.
mistakenly, in the chaos, the fog of war, sort of shoots Joel and his daughter. The daughter is killed. Joel doesn't die. They're rescued by the brother. And then we jump forward 20 years. And so
Mhm.
this death of the daughter is like the defining character trait for Joel, right? And
Oh,
we
yes.
we see him uh almost unchanged. I mean, he looks older, of course, but it's, you know, like 20 years later, he's made his way to Boston. He's living in what we come to learn is called a quarantine zone, which is run by this fascist state, which is called Fedra, which seems to be the remnants of the US government, such as it was. And a lot of this to me was like pretty standard
Yeah.
post-apocalypse stuff, right? Like the only state that can rise in the aftermath is a fascist state
Yeah.
that,
It feels very simplistic in order to get them on the road.
right,
Um, you
creates an
know,
antagonism.
right. And that is a
Right.
great point. That like in the conception, the imagination of in most almost all of this type of content, the imagination goes to like, of course it's a fascist state.
Like, what do you
Right.
mean? A non-fascist? No, that's
Yeah.
literally impossible.
Right, right.
Well, so who's going to watch out for capitalism? If not,
Right, right. And
fascist.
who's gonna like control the situation? It would just be lawless,
Yeah.
and we can't have that, in a world where you could die at any second from like a nick from from a zombie. But
No,
we,
exactly. All
we better
right.
we better clamp down and keep this project going. You know?
So let's move through the episodes like relatively quickly. I don't want to like get bogged
Yeah,
down in too much plot summary. I'm assuming people who are listening have either watched the show or are planning to or played the game.
sure.
Um, the main character, aside from Joel, is Ellie. I think it's good that this is there are two characters in this show, right? And there are other characters we meet along the way, but they are very ancillary to these, like the central duo.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of refreshing. A lot of the other prestige shows on HBO have had a larger cast, have sort of
Hmm.
the Sopranos family, the family at 6 Feet Under. It's
Well,
like this is
Game of
just
Thrones, of
the
course,
Game of
is
Thrones, which is like
yeah.
just hundreds of characters, right? Um, so the main conflict is there are the bad guys, Fedra, there's the Fireflies, they're rebels. Ellie is immune to the cordyceps infection.
So we
And
are led to believe.
that's what we find out, right? She's been bitten by an infected, but did not become a zombie.
Right.
And we learn why later on in the show. Joel is hired essentially to take Ellie out west to this Firefly installation where there are scientists who are working on a cure and they just need someone like her. And they're going to, you know, take a draw out her blood and develop a
Right.
vaccine and the world will be saved, right?
And what do you know? Joel wants to find his brother.
And Joel's brother happens to be out in that area as
Yeah, yeah.
well, right?
Should go hunt him down after 20 years. I think I'm really gonna go west this
Well,
time.
I don't think we know entirely how long they've been
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
separated,
yeah,
but
yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah. So they get out on the way, and initially I don't think Joel even knows that she's immune to the, right. That's kind of
Yeah.
like Marlene, who's like the Firefly leader, is like, just get her out there,
Yep. Yeah,
and
it's hidden.
her mother's out there or something. There's some kind of excuse given, and she gets bitten early on, right?
Yep.
And
Yep.
again, for a second time. and isn't doesn't fall.
Well,
And
and when they
they
get
do
like caught right when they're leaving the
if a
QZ,
Fedra
and
agent catches
she
them.
registers as sick, and they're ready to kill her, Joel
Logic,
and
yeah.
Tess.
But she then shows that, oh look, I have a
Yeah,
scar, I've been bit before, whatever. Um, the second episode again has a little bit of a flashback opening, setting things in Indonesia for some reason. There was a lot of blowback against this, right, when it came out.
yeah,
It was like, why are we
which
rooting
I think is
this?
fair.
I think
Yeah,
so too. Like, why
there's no point.
have it be another Asian originating virus when
Yeah,
there's such a nasty anti-Asian sentiment that
that's
arose
right.
when COVID happened? And this is like
You're
it's
you can invent any scenario here.
right. It could be in Kansas.
Yeah,
It could
yeah,
be in Iceland. It could be
right.
anywhere. And yet, no, let's go back to Asia.
Yeah,
It feels misguided and a little bit ugly. Um, but yeah, we get more info on the cordyceps. They in the second episode they're escaping from Boston, right? And they go through where else but like the Museum of Patriotism, right? Which is overrun by zombies and the most dreaded kind of zombie of all, the clicker, which is like
liquor.
this echolocating like target zombie, right? And
Yep,
this feels very video game, right? You're like, okay, so we've got the like level one bad guys. Okay, this is like the mini boss bad guy, right?
yep.
And then there's going to be like a third type of zombie we meet later. You know, it's all fine. Um, Tess, Joel's seeming girlfriend and helper, gets infected in their escape from the museum and valiantly sacrifices herself so Joel and Ellie like might carry the mission forward. Which
Right. Might save
again,
the world. Might save the
might
world.
yeah,
Which is important for what's to come because
yes.
ostensibly Joel is only going to do this to save the world because Tess is
His
like,
Tess
please go
sacrificed
save
her.
the world.
Tess sacrificed
So
herself.
just to put that on the docket, she is willing to die for this.
Yeah,
Very obviously like noble, but clearly like needed mission, if this is possible. Right.
I think it's good that you're lampshading this, as we say in the recap community. Okay, episode 3. It is finally a gay survivalist romance, what we've all been waiting for,
We've all
and
and was a phenomenon.
people love that episode.
And it's a really affecting episode.
I think it's
It really
beautiful,
really is.
but it
Yeah.
is not without its problems, right?
Oh
I
my.
mean,
This like
so Nick Offerman is like this celibate, very masculine prepper
yeah.
who's built a literal bunker under his home before the
Hard to say.
apocalypse.
Would you say he's incel or volcel?
Uh,
Seems it's hard to
I
say.
think incel, but also just a closet in the closet too, right?
And
And
also incel, but not with all the negative
right, and
baggage that
well,
so
with
often
some
comes.
of the negative baggage, right? He has like a room full of guns in his house and is like ready to
Yeah, fair enough.
like he's when he finally meets the one man he will end up spending his life with, he's ready to murder him like
Right.
within seconds of meeting
Right.
catching him in his
He
trap.
begrudgingly gives him lunch, right?
Yeah.
It's his first
Also,
peace offering.
right, and although he's a gay person who's been completely isolated from other gay people and gay culture for the most part, he still knows everything about like what wine to pair with rabbit
Right.
and stuff.
Which is
So
quickly pointed out to make clear that he is in fact gay.
right, which is
Right.
like, you know, that's not something that gay people just inherit from. You know, like I think I was talking to you about this before. There's a moment in The Sopranos in the final season with Vito, the gay mobster character, who like kind of like Nick Offerman is a very masculine. You know, he's a mafioso. We see him beating
Yeah.
guys up. We see him doing all sorts of murders to people. Eventually goes on the run because he's outed. And he's in an antique shop, and he says, "Oh, this is a nice pot." And the gay antique shop owner is like, "That's the most valuable piece in the whole store. You've got a great eye," which again kind of plays into this idea that like gay people just magically can like
Just
rate
have
and
great taste.
yeah.
Yeah.
um, but as you say, like I think the story does, despite that, it is a good story. You know,
It is, but it's also like I think an important uh, example of the way that like Americanness will permeate basically any of our cultural products, right? The "Don't Tread Me" flag, the complete inability to conceive of putting all this time into this. I would assume for way longer than the
Then,
actual
oh
apocalypse.
yeah,
So he was
yeah, yeah.
clearly preparing for something,
Yeah,
and he couldn't conceive of helping to have other people survive it, despite this incredible amount of resources that he had prepared. And then when it happens, it's almost this gleeful libertarian moment, in fact,
right,
for him. The
right.
music is
I
very
was right.
upbeat.
I was right. You were
He's
wrong.
banging through the like natural gas. He's driving his car through the fence. It's all
Yeah,
very
yeah,
exciting. He's going to the liquor store and getting all the wine. He's like, everything's so fun
yeah.
because you are alone on the land
And
with
he was
no
right.
government, no constraints. Everything's going to work out for just me. And although I am very affected, I thought it was a quite like lovely episode of TV. His lesson that he learns is so funny because he writes the letter
Yeah, yeah.
to Joel after they die and says, I learned that there's one person, you find one person worth saving, and to hell with all those motherfuckers. And you're like, okay, well, first of all, that's not how you actually started. You started by wanting to save nobody.
Yeah,
And thankful the first thing you try to do is kill the guy who ended up being like the sweetest person in the history
yeah,
of the world.
yeah.
And then despite that opening your horizons, that there is
You've
someone worth saving,
you've still
you
not
then
expand.
stop there.
Yeah,
Yes, yes.
exactly.
You refuse to like be nice to Joel and Tess when they come. You put your gun out at the
Literally has a
table.
gun on the table the
Yes.
whole
So it's
dinner.
like
Like
we go on this emotional journey where this man learns to love, but he
he
in
learns
the
to love one, only
in the
one
most
person.
American way, it is one person, still the fence. He's not helping. And like we're
He
led to
has a
believe that no
one-man
one else,
war with the
right? No
raiders
one
that
else comes
come.
by. No one else comes by for help in 20 years. And if they do,
he he
we
kills
never
them.
see how yeah, yeah, we never see how Nick Offerman's character is supposed to react. Because one would assume if his lover showed up, I would say, let's say one per year is coming. Okay.
Sure.
What's the story of these other 20 people? It's like, did he give them one steak and then tell them to go the way he was going to until
Well,
the
I
guy
think it
wanted to
seems like
sleep with
once
him?
his boyfriend comes, he's even worse
But the
because
boyfriend would
then he
the
has to
boyfriend wanted friends and
right,
stuff, but
right.
he.
But as we saw with the Joel relationship, it's really hard for he becomes even
Yeah.
more like
Yeah, yeah.
psychotically defensive with
Right.
the
And so
having the
that
gun
like
at
to
their
me is
lunch.
the big
It's very
takeaway. It's like
American.
my favorite part of the whole series, I think,
Yeah.
is just the way in which we talked about this with the Arrival thing. It's like these writers imagine and conceive of something very interesting, but then don't confront the obvious like flaw in this, which
Yeah.
is that
Yeah.
the saddest thing about this character is that he was never able to like help more people. Why didn't he become the Oscar Schindler of this area?
No,
You know?
totally. It's ridiculous. But luckily he does leave a car and some goods for Ellie and Joel, and they finally
Sure.
commence the like on the road portion of the series. They
Yeah.
head out west. And Joel doesn't take a lot of stuff. He takes like one gun, some canned goods.
Yeah, it takes
Uh
too little. I don't get it. Just fill your truck up.
yeah. Doesn't really make sense. Eventually they reach Kansas City, right? Which has been liberated from the fascist Fedra. But bad news. It's been replaced by even worse fascists and
Yes.
fascists led by a mom.
Right,
Right?
because look, any popular revolution that reacts to a fascist government, I don't know if you heard, Stu, but it inevitably becomes an even worse version. That's the only way it can go.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's I think Melanie Linsky is the actress who plays Kathleen, who's like the dictator of Kansas City, newly self-appointed. I think she's
Mhm.
great.
Yeah.
She's also in that show Yellow Jackets. She's a really good actress, and there is something funny about her kind of like soft-spoken, like, well, they murdered my brother. You're
Right.
just like, like, what's going on here? We also
But
meet,
isn't that like I think that's kind of like just an important quick thing to note, right? Is that
yeah,
that because of the nature of, and the strength of it is the pair, right? Joel and
Mhm.
Ellie are amazing to watch together.
Right.
But when you're talking about social reconstruction in the
Aftermath of this pandemic or whatever.
aftermath and continued reality of an apocalyptic event, the people who are still like, even the people who are going to toe to toe with the fascist government are still stuck in this like vengeance
Well,
trail that
right. I
they
mean,
have to
she's
do. Like,
single-mindedly focused on this
right,
guy,
we must
Henry.
find Henry. Just let
Henry
Henry go
was,
and get
who
killed by
cares?
a
Yeah.
zombie.
Yeah. Who
Yes,
cares about Henry?
build
Like,
build the society that you've been working on. Like,
yeah.
what, you just did the thing.
Yeah.
Who cares? Make him go away. It doesn't matter. Everybody's dying. Everyone's kids are dead.
Yeah.
Everybody's been
Why
taken
the
out in a thousand.
single-minded vengeance despite,
Right. Especially
like,
as like
and as we
the
see in
biggest
the
flaw is
episode,
that the brother is like, don't do that. The brother we're led to believe is almost like a messianic figure with
her
unlimited.
dead brother.
Yeah, he
Yeah.
forgives. He wants to forgive Henry. He wanted to build something great in the
But he's
world.
dead. He was betrayed
But
by
he's
Henry.
dead. And now she can't help it. She can't even help it. She just has to kill
Right. She
him.
like sits in her childhood bedroom and is
So
like,
all of these people who were trying to create some sort of popular overthrow, they now all have to go on this mission with her, and she gets them trapped in
and they were
their
killed.
demise.
Right.
Yes,
Like
yes.
her single-minded obsession with Henry leads to the entire destruction
Yeah,
by a zombie, an underground zombie cell erupts,
yeah.
and there's even a giant zombie that comes out. Pretty,
Oh yeah.
pretty
Pretty
scary.
cool. That part's
Yeah,
pretty cool.
yeah. And of course, once again, we meet Henry and his brother Sam, who
Oh, that part
is
is rough, man.
it's brutal. It's brutal.
Yeah.
He's really he is actually a deaf person, right? A hearing impaired actor, and I think the show does a lot of good work in including people who are differently abled and who have
Yeah.
different. It's like it's refreshing, and it didn't face as much blowback as shows sometimes do when they attempt to be more inclusive.
Yeah.
Which I think is interesting. I'm not sure exactly why.
Well, I think it, I mean, again, as with much of the show, these moments are very effective. They're very good. I mean, like, it's a rough and really interesting watch, but the video gameness of it all that sort
Yeah.
of is the backbone of
Well,
this
there's like a
show.
monster of the week quality to each
It's
episode in the
and
way that
like,
there are
right.
monsters in
And
each level of a
whenever
video
you
game.
see whenever you see someone redeeming very early in the show, you realize that they're just going to be a sad thing.
Yeah.
And it just because that's the way that, I mean, the video game works, and obviously much of writing in this form anyway, but it's the biggest problem with the show and is it's very telegraphed. So when you
Yeah.
meet
Yeah.
this pair, it's almost like
You know
you could,
that that kid is dead, right? Like the
that kid
instant
is
you see him.
gone. And it's the same way that there's so many moments in the show where they go, it's been a while since we've seen some infected. We're getting a little relaxed here and we're getting to know each other.
You just
Next
know
scene.
us.
Oh no. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Don't
yeah.
say that. You never know what's around the
Right.
corner.
I'll
And
be
then,
right back in a horror movie,
right,
right?
right.
Like,
But it's carried by these incredibly strong performances, whether, because
I
like I
mean,
said, like the Nick Offerman character, it really, both of them, the couple
they're
is incredible.
they're
I
great.
think. I
The
think they do a
acting is
really good
great.
job.
Yeah.
And the
And
brothers are fantastic as well.
yeah, and Ellie and Joel are both
Yeah.
fantastic. I mean, obviously. So moving forward, Ellie and Joel are getting really tight. They're forming a kind of father-daughter bond. They reach Wyoming, where Joel's brother is, and so in the last episode, we had a fascist overthrow of Fedra by worse fascists. In this, we have communists, right? They've set up their
Yes.
communist town, and they're protecting their town by spreading rumors about something horrible there, but there isn't anything horrible. I mean, aside from communism, which is the most horrible thing
Right.
an
Which is a
American
scourge.
could
Sure.
possibly imagine. But they the town has power. They have movies. They have civilization. It
Hmm.
feels. I mean, if I were Joel, I would just stay in the town
Well, he
with
tried.
Ellie. Well, with Ellie
Yeah. I mean, well, yeah, but like she's pretty determined at this point
to
to
get
do it,
to the
which gets to
fireplace.
like just how shitty a guy Joel is, I think. But, you know,
Yeah,
she really wants to do this. And he, I think, is finding out he can't. This is to me the most important, the best part of his story is instead of like the superhero who's dragging Ellie to success, he's becoming a hindrance and he's being
He
forced to reckon
tries
with his mortality. It's really interesting,
he
this
tries to
part, I think.
pawn Ellie off on his brother. He said, "Hey, my brother's better at
Right.
this. He
But
knows
I
the
think
territory."
genuinely, yes, I think he's like, you'll be safer. And I like, there's like, my back hurts.
And
He's
he's
like, my
also like,
back,
but he's also, I
my
think,
heart
worried
hurts.
he's getting too close to her also, right? And she's breaking
Yeah.
down that carapace of distance that he developed for himself after the death of his own daughter.
Right.
He doesn't want to be close
Right.
to
But
anyone. He's lost Tess, his friends, Nick
sure.
Offerman character. Like everyone he knows is essentially dead, and he knows that if he
Right.
continues to be close to Ellie, she's gonna die too, and that's just
Well,
gonna.
and I think ultimately, looking at the whole piece, the idea I think is that if he just gives her to Tommy now, then she can go save the world. Because
Yeah,
if I keep going, I'm not going to be able to
I'm not gonna be able to say goodbye.
give her away. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Which again,
And
very, very telegraphed. But again, I mean, it's all very interesting. I mean, the communist utopia thing is, it's weird because they do a good job of not having this really dark thing behind it, particularly, which is usually the case with these.
well, right. I mean, I think it's fascinating that like it's not there isn't some
Right,
evil dictator who's in like the Wizard of Oz or someone who's controlling everyone, right? Like
right, right, right.
and
I wonder how many portrayals on American television
have of
this
communism
sort
have been
of
this positive?
economic and social setup have been this positive.
Probably
Um,
zero.
and I mean, it's obviously just
It's communism's big breakthrough.
right. They finally got on HBO,
30
right?
30 years after the fall of the Soviet Union, it's like, all right, we can have like one town that's
One
in the
town for
middle
one
of
for one episode.
that's in a zombie wasteland. Like
Yeah, yeah,
they're that's okay. That's not a threat
yeah.
anymore. So the next episode, after Joel decides to take Ellie, after all, they get to the university. It's abandoned. It's overrun with monkeys, chimps. Joel is stabbed, right? And then we have this episode where Ellie is tending to Joel in a kind of abandoned house somewhere, but there's the episode's a flashback to the night that Ellie was infected. And I think, like, as I was talking about, like one of the things that I think the show is about is a nostalgia for a pre-internet world, right?
Yeah.
And we sort of really see that in this episode. It's like, what if society stopped in 2003? We never had Facebook. We never had Twitter. We never had YouTube. We never,
Yeah.
like what if, and what stopped it? Well, destruction of most of
Well, and
civilization. But
also you'd reach this point, right, where the way that consumerism has moved,
yeah,
right, where the mall originally had destroyed the mom and pop downtowns.
right.
And for
And
this, there
now
was
the
a
mall
moment,
itself, mall in turn has been destroyed by the big
big
box
box stores, and
retailer,
then
and
big
then
box retailers are destroyed by Amazon. And so
yeah,
everything, like now, there are towns where Walmart is like a quaint thing worth saving, and there are towns where the mall is something that you need to go to,
right,
right?
right, right.
And it's interesting that because of that, I think the nostalgia that you're speaking of, it's like the mall, for someone who hasn't seen it, it's portrayed in this beautiful,
It's
this is
religious.
the most
Yeah,
beautiful thing I've ever
yeah,
seen. Whereas, like, there's a world where you could have portrayed it like you were writing for Adbusters instead.
yeah.
Like, look at this ruin that shows us exactly why we fell or whatever.
Right, but it's not that at all.
It's not that at
Instead,
all.
it's a temple of it's the seven wonders of the world, right?
That's right.
She tours her around the mall, shows her all the arcade, right?
Right.
Even the escalator becomes an
Yeah.
almost magic, thing.
But
Uh,
this is where part of it sort of falls apart to me. It's like
Go on, yeah.
she is considered this great hider or jumper around at night, so she gets recruited by the Fireflies,
Oh, her
right?
friend, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, the friend is because she's just really good at moving around. So first, it's weird because I would have assumed that these two best friends were hopping around together a lot. And then when she tries to recruit, she's like, please let Ellie become a Firefly. They're just like, no. And it's like, I'm sorry, what's their recruiting practice?
Well,
Like
I think
they
we
have
learn later that the Fireflies, Marlene, they already know who Ellie is and have this plan for her, right?
yeah, but
So they're not going
why
to
would
just let her
she
go off to like Georgia or
well,
wherever.
no, but why wouldn't she then be brought under the wing? Wouldn't you want
Yeah,
it seems like a seamless way to go into it if I'm the Fireflies.
just
You
like
got the
send
best
her
you
west with
no, but like you've got the best friend, right?
yeah.
And it's like the best friend just happens to be like, oh, the one who's immune, can she join? And then you could have been like, yeah, we'll post her in Eugene, Oregon,
or
or
wherever
whatever.
it is they're going. Yeah, yeah,
Instead, it's
yeah.
like, no, we'll come find you and deal with you later. It just felt a little weird.
Okay, yeah, I think that's right. There's also a tension between Ellie and her friend. Ellie is a rebel, as we've seen throughout the show, but she's also kind of a rule follower at heart or something. And the
It is
friend,
very,
it's
very muddy.
it's kind of confused, right? The friend is like, I'm a firefly, and she's like, you're gonna blow people up. That's too far for me, or something, right?
Yeah,
And
the character she
you have
builds,
she
even
sees that her friend has some bombs in her like hideout, and
can't believe it,
she's
repulsed.
like scandalized and
Okay.
disgusted. Yeah,
Despite having this intuition about everything about the world,
yeah.
right? That
But
like,
in
you
this
know,
case, she's just like, you've gone too far.
you're gonna
Like,
join the terrorists,
yeah,
right?
it feels very
I
weird.
don't understand that part. I mean, and she's not quite young enough for me to believe she's just been so
She's
effectively
so naive or whatever, right?
brainwashed
Yeah,
by
and
her training.
she's smart. That's her
Right. And
defining
she's
character trait.
rebelling against
She's beating
the
people up
training.
in the Fedra school and
Yeah.
stuff. It doesn't
This
really
is a
clock for
huge
me.
problem for the show. Yeah.
But then the last stop on their little wonders tour is the costume shop. So when they're dressed as monsters, what happens?
Yeah.
They are attacked by real monsters.
And then become monsters, at least one of them.
The irony.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a little heavy handed. It is very sad.
It's very cute. It's very cute.
And also
Um,
there's a sort of a romantic subtext to their relationship that
yeah.
is not really fully expressed, but it's just kind of it's there.
Yeah, there's a
Uh,
kiss.
yeah, there's a
And
kiss, and
again, as with all of those moments in the show, they're probably my favorite parts of the show.
well, they feel like
Uh,
real human moments of human
yeah,
connection in a time of
right,
disaster, right?
right. And I think
So
that's like part of this move culturally is these movies that are based in this genre that or shows that spend
well, they
very
have
little
to.
time with zombies.
Right, they have
Ultimately.
to. That's what I meant at the outset when I said like they use this as a like template to explore these other types of stories, right?
That's right.
So we
Yeah.
have the sort of the gay love story. We have the Moby Dick story where Henry is her Moby Dick and she's gonna
Yeah.
just throw her life away to kill him. We have the brothers happiness communist utopia story. um, Eventually we move on to in episode 8 another genre which is religious fanaticism, right?
Yes.
So we've seen a fascist, we've seen communist, now we see a religious zealot, right? And this guy's awful. He's
Yeah.
just great acting job, just completely despised the character from the instant he
Hmm.
sets foot on the screen. um he traps Ellie. She wants penicillin to help Joel. She gets it, but there's like a standoff, and it's very clear that these guys are going to hunt her down.
Yeah.
And it's not that they know anything about her mission or anything. It's just that the guy is a monster who wants followers, and especially young female followers, for obvious
Right.
reasons.
And he does this pitch where it's like, you're so smart, you
We
should
can rule
run this with
together,
me
yeah.
in an
Which
attempt to like,
which feels like a classic
yeah,
abuser.
manipulator abuser behavior.
And it
And I
turns
think
out
that she is just remarkable in this episode from
she's
as
great.
an actor. I mean,
Yeah,
she's just so amazing in the whole show.
she's incredible.
I
Yeah,
love this
Bella
performance. But like
Ramsey. Yeah.
that episode, she's just so like the killing when she kills him finally
Oh, it's incredible, and
is
it's
so good. The way she
I
comes out of it, the way she comes out of it like traumatized, like all of
oh,
that is so well acted. Like it
it's
sort of
completely
forgives for me
believable.
the hilarious leaps of Joel's life being saved somehow after being
So quickly,
stabbed by some rusty pole or
like a
something that he then
baseball
rips
bat,
out,
like a
yeah, of
bat,
his
like
own body. And
yeah. And then
she finds one string or something.
he gets a little penicillin, and he's better,
He's
right?
better. He's still grinding, but he's better. He somehow gets there. I mean, like that
Yeah,
part is,
it's
just so
ludicrous. I
ridiculous.
when I rewatched it, I was like, "Oh, this is insane!" Like when I first
Yeah.
saw it, I misremembered that he was like healing for days and days. No, it's like
Well,
no,
because at the end, after he is stabbed, they try to play that one episode where it looks like maybe he's dead,
yeah,
right? Like
but
when
he's
he's
not.
on the snowbank, you know. But of course he's not.
No,
But
he's fine.
she just carries it. She just like
She's killing it.
even all of the leaps they're making when she's downstairs with him in that basement, saving his life. The whole performance is fantastic.
a couple other things. Cannibalism, right? Turns out these religious zealots
Yeah.
are eating their
Couldn't
dead.
see that coming. That was a
Yeah, and
huge
I mean,
left
like,
turn.
cannibalism is one of the big apocalyptic genre tropes, right? That in the end times, we'll talk about it in some future things we're looking at. All right, we're nearing up on the end of time here. Let's talk about the ending, like that, because
Yep.
I think that's where the most interesting stuff happens. Like, they get to the Fireflies at last, and Marlene, the woman from Boston, has somehow beaten them out here.
Yeah,
Not a,
what?
not
We can't
explained.
spend too much time on that, but it is then why didn't you just bring yeah.
Yeah, it
Anyway,
doesn't make any sense to me at all. Agreed. They're going to kill Ellie to get into her brain, to use her tissue to make a vaccine for the
to
cordyceps infection.
potentially be able to. It's never confirmed that
It's
it's a
not
guarantee.
entirely clear that they're going to succeed. That's right. But it's also not confirmed that they're going to fail, right? I mean, this
At
could
all.
work.
Yep.
This
Yep.
this could be the thing. And Joel will not do it, right?
Yeah, Joel really has not processed much of his life over the 20 years,
I
right?
mean, Joel, I
He
think we're to understand Joel has this new daughter to replace the one he lost, who's the same
right.
age as the daughter was when
He
she
did not
died.
go to therapy over the last 2 decades. He says he has, there's still dreams and it's over and over
Yeah.
again. I fail, I let her down. And then there's a facsimile of his daughter, and he can't lose her, right?
He can't repeat
It's
it, right?
right, right. He
And
can't, he's not
and
processed, he
in
can't
order to
process how,
prevent repeating that loss, he
yep.
is literally willing to sacrifice the best chance for salvation for the entire human race.
Right,
Um,
including like the people who are considered the good people worth saving,
yeah,
right? People like Tommy will actually be able to have a kid,
yeah.
all of that. Like there are people in his life
And like,
who
this is,
would,
as you said, the one thing Tess was like, save the world, Joel,
right.
right? Like,
Tess wants the world saved, but he could have gone back to Tommy and been a really great uncle with no threat, a brand new world, having been the savior of the world and have done what Ellie herself said she wanted
she,
to have happen.
yeah,
Now, I think the one thing that gives him a glimmer of possible moral justification is that she wasn't told.
no, right.
But to me, the failing of the ending is like,
He
at the
should
least, if
wake
he
her up and be like,
and
hey.
ask and agree,
But by then,
hold
he's already
hold
murdered all
someone
the
at gunpoint,
scientists.
right, right, hold someone at gunpoint, and be like, we're gonna wake her up and let her decide.
Right.
Instead,
He chooses
he
for
he,
her.
he single-handedly destroys his relationship with this new daughter as well. That's
Right.
over.
Because when she wakes up, he's like, yeah, it didn't work. It
Yeah,
turns out
yeah.
there's a bunch of people like you.
Yeah, where are my clothes? Why am I still in a hospital gown if everything was fine?
And he's like, and the last scene of the show is them as they return to Tommy's town or whatever.
Yeah.
There's she says, Joel, did everything that you tell me,
Swear to me. Swear to me.
swear to me, did that really happen? And he said, yeah, it did. So
Right.
obviously,
But
like,
what's so inconsistent? Oh, what's so inconsistent with this is that he has existed in this nightmare of this mistake and guilt that he's had.
yeah.
It's the only defining character of his
So what does he
entire
do when
instantly does something that will make him
repeats?
guilty for the next 20 years.
Yeah.
And the time before it was just like a really bad situation with a trigger happy federal agent.
Right.
This is also the chance to save mankind.
Yeah.
And, and now he has to deal with that guilt. And somehow we're supposed to believe. And again, like ultimately, this is like the tie-in, I think, to where what the podcast is exploring
Yeah.
often is even in these apocalyptic conceptions and imaginations and in this world that has so much going for it. I think there are elements of the show that are great.
Yeah.
We still are led to believe that an even completely fabricated nuclear like unit or familial connection will still like trump all, no
Yeah.
matter what.
I think the way I would articulate that is that once again, we're led to this point where an individual is given the choice of the group or their individual desires and wants. And once again,
Right.
they choose themselves, right?
Right.
That the individuality is more important than even the salvation of all of humanity. A little different than Arrival, right? Because at the end of Arrival, Amy Adams has the Doom daughter. Here, Joel is like, I could save. She saves humanity and then still has her Doom daughter. Joel cannot give up the doomed daughter to
Yeah.
save humanity, right? Like
Right.
there's something there's some kind of
It's a really
swirling.
it's like it's obviously just they try to make it where he's so emotionally wrecked, and precisely because he hasn't actually processed his life, he makes this decision. So
Yeah,
that's what keeps you from fully not liking him. I mean, you still feel for him, I think, when he's doing this.
yeah,
But again, it really just stretched the limits of, how I think
credulity.
this. Yes, yeah, and I think it's like, it's a lack of respect for her life because
Yeah.
if she now thinks that
Well,
she
and plus all
tried
the
but
people,
failed to save the world.
Henry and his Sam who died, Tess who died,
Yeah,
like
all these people.
everything else that happened to them is
But
rendered
that's when
completely
you come back
meaningless.
to what's really similar to the Offerman character in the end is that,
Selfish. Yeah.
this motto of there's one
Saving
person
one
worth saving
person.
and fuck all these motherfuckers or whatever the
Yeah,
line
no, no,
is.
brilliant. That's really
And
well
he
said,
and then it
Michael.
comes right to the end and he chooses, like,
He does the
despite
same thing.
everyone else's sacrifice, fuck all those motherfuckers, and they happen to be his lover, the people who have saved his
The
life.
leader of the Fireflies, the only resistance to this
Yeah, yeah,
fascist
yeah, yeah, yeah,
government, like
yeah. One by one
these
by one.
nurses and scientists who he just shoots a doctor
Right,
in the head.
right. But that's also like probably what I mean. I haven't read about Last of Us 2, but I think, at the end of the day, this is television and they're not going to
They're not
waste
going to just
this.
ignore that conflict.
It's
Yeah,
got they've got to have a second season, and this is a
that's what
good
the
one.
second season's going to be
Now
about.
they
Yeah,
can get into all the emotion. I'm sure the relationship falls apart, etc.
yeah,
But again, they just can't quite they can't quite get there.
yeah. I mean, good show. I like it, but I agree with you. I think there's some of these leaps in logic and some of these problems that you've pointed out. I think kind of lessen my level of enjoyment on the second go
But
through.
for us and for purposes of the show and just enjoying like apocalyptic thinking, apocalyptic content, the episodes really do give you all of these different responses,
Yeah,
which I think makes it really, to like rewatch it in that way it was really interesting as we started talking about it.
totally. So any other last thoughts on the show?
I mean, I will watch this show until its conclusion for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Despite some of the problems I have with it, I think it is pretty exciting and at times like genuinely affecting, I think. And again,
It's
I
well
think that's a
made. It
really
looks
yeah,
beautiful. It's
yeah.
well scored, etc. All right. So what are we talking about for next week, Michael?
Well, next week we're going to try something a little different because we want to do film, we want to do TV, we want to do some literature, but we also do want to talk about our world
Yeah,
sometimes and talk about, sometimes there'll be news items that we will bring up sort of on the beat of the apocalypse, but also events in our world that speak to the way we think about catastrophe or looming crises, right? And
exactly.
people our age in particular, the choice I think is perfect for me. The phenomenon of the inconvenient truth and Vice President Al Gore and his early adopting of climate change advocacy and the way he was portrayed by the media and the way he was viewed by America is so incredible. And I think like truly fascinating in terms of when it happened and
And
what it
what's
suggests.
what's happening now in the way.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
And the phenomenon of this documentary, the hockey stick discourse and the
yeah, yeah, yeah.
discredit, all of it is pretty like tragic, but also humorous. I mean, like
Yeah.
Al Gore is perfect, I think, to start our real world examination, I think.
That's great. All right. Well, I look forward to that, and we will see you all next week. I'm Stu.
And I'm Michael.
All right. Take it easy, guys.
Are we done?
Yeah,
I thought it was good.
that was really good.
Um,
And it's
one
about an hour again.
Great. So one thing I think we need to do, and I don't know if you can put it in post,
Uh huh.
um, I think we need to have So there's two things. I don't really like the intro of us. I don't think I talked about myself very well at all. You re-listen to it and tell me how bad it is.
I'm sure it's fine, but okay.
The second thing is I do think that we really need to hit where to follow, how we need you to subscribe, reviewing at the end, and maybe even the beginning of the episodes. Um, the handle of the Instagram page, especially in these early,
No,
all
I
these
think that's a
pods.
really good point. Why don't we just record
And
a little tale about that right now, and I can work it in.
yeah, do you want to do it? Do you have the handle up? I can't. It's like the end of the world WMS or
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah. I have it right
I think
here.
so. We're gonna just for now direct people to Instagram and to review the podcast, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Let me find. Why do I have the Instagram right here? End of the world email. Uh, it's the end of the world WMS is the Instagram.
Okay. Um, do you want to just say that? I mean, did we say the name of we didn't say the name of the podcast either this time at the end. Or at the beginning, did we?
We did at the beginning.
We did at the beginning. Okay.
Yeah. Hold on.
Because
Let me
I think you
just.
can even do the ending we have and then literally just come back on and be like, this is our second episode and we really appreciate any reviews and ratings help. The podcast is available anywhere that you usually get your podcasts. And
Yeah.
please follow us and subscribe to the podcast and follow us at
And I'll
Instagram.
have it like come on after the music or whatever, or during the
Yeah.
music as it's
Yeah,
playing.
that's good. Yeah.
All right, hold on. Let me just do it right now.
Yeah, sure.
All right. That was our second episode, and we just back to remind you all to like and subscribe. You can find the podcast anywhere you would normally get your podcasts, and you can follow us on Instagram at the end of the world WMS, and we'll have little snippets from future episodes up there, and you can get all of
Maybe
your
maybe the odd meme.
yeah, even a meme or two may appear. So follow us there, and
And any reviews and ratings obviously help. Can't
very,
lie.
very, very welcome. So we'll be back next week to talk all things gore, and we'll see you then.